Hello dears, welcome back to another English lesson. Today in this video, we are going to discuss the chapter The Enemy from the textbook VISTAS. This chapter, The Enemy, that's written by Paul S. Buck. The story focuses on the universal brotherhood. Okay, the story is all about the conflict between a person's duty to the nation and his own conscience. Okay. First, let's see the profile of the writer. Who's the writer? Paul Stricker Buck. So, Pearl S. Buck was an American writer and novelist. She had a Chinese name, Zha Shenshou, as she spent her childhood in China, being the daughter of missionaries. She was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in 1932 and the Nobel Prize in Literature in the year 1938. Her novel, The Good Earth, won a Nobel Prize in Literature for her. Buck had a humanistic attitude towards the problems of life. Now let's go to the introduction. This chapter, The Enemy, deals with the conflict between man's humane feelings and the prejudices created by nations at war. It highlights the universal human values than narrow considerations like nationalism. The bond uniting all human beings must transcend the difference between nations. Okay, the story deals with the conflict between a man's duty towards the state and towards his own conscience. In fact, the story raises the questions about the ethics of a human being at the time of war. Okay, then when was the story set? The story is set during the Second World War. Here, a Japanese doctor finds an American POW. POW means prisoner of war, at his doorstep. He is in dilemma that being a doctor, should he save the wounded man, or being a Japanese, should he hand over the enemy to the army? Okay, so in the Second World War, who were the enemies? Japanese and the Americans. So, there comes this dilemma that being a doctor, should he save the wounded man, or being a Japanese, should he hand over the enemy to the army? This is the conflict in this chapter. Okay, let's go to the chapter. The writer introduces the main character of the story, Dr. Sadao Hoki. Okay, Sadao has been brought up in a traditional and patriotic environment and he dislikes Americans. Okay, so where was his house? Dr. Sadao Hoki's house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast where as a little boy he had often played. Okay, Dr. Sadao's house was situated on the coast of Japan. He had been living there since his childhood. The house had a low height and was made of stone. It was set upon the rocky beach, which had a boundary line made with pine trees that were tilted towards one side. When he was a child, he used to climb up the pine trees. On his visit to the South Seas, he would see men do so in order to get coconut from the trees. So he would accompany his father to the islands of the South Seas often. His father would point towards the islands and would say that those were the stepping stones towards the future of Japan. Sadao was very curious to know about the future, but the father had no answer to give him. His father was so serious. He never played with Sadao. He never joked with Sadao, but he struggled a lot for his only son. His son's education was his chief concern. Even though he was so traditional in his beliefs, he sent his son to America to learn more about surgery and medicine. Sadao went to America when he was 22 years old. He came back at 30 after his studies. Sadao became famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist before his father died. He became a scientist after he perfected a discovery which would render wounds and clean. He was not sent abroad with the troops as the old military general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically. Sadao was kept back to treat him. Okay, now our Sadao, he was standing in front of his house. Then, at that time, what is the atmosphere outside? Clouds were rising from the ocean now. Okay, look at the textbook. Okay, the unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Okay, so it's so foggy outside. Sadao watched mist hide outlines of a little island near the shore and then came creeping up the beach below the house. So he is just standing outside watching this foggy night. At this time, someone came there. Who is it? That is his wife, Hannah. Okay, Hannah, his wife. How did he met Hannah? That is explained here. Hannah was a Japanese girl whom he met in America. Sadao knew that his father would marry him to a Japanese girl only, and so he endured this before falling in love with her. Sadao considered himself to be lucky to have accidentally met her at an American professor's house when he went abroad for higher studies. He wondered if he hadn't met her, he wouldn't have got a wife all his life. He thought that the professor and his wife were kind, as they were keen to help foreign students. He went to their house because it was there that he had met Hannah. Sadao would often tell Hannah that it was a mere coincidence that he went to professor's house that night, as the rooms in his house were so small, the food was not good, and the professor's wife was very talkative. If he hadn't gone there that night, he wouldn't have met Hannah. At that time, Hannah was a new student there. Sadao and Hannah loved each other even after having 2 children. After many years of marriage, they hadn't married in a haste in America. Rather, they returned to Japan, sought permission from their parents, and then got married in a traditional Japanese ceremony. They are discussed all the details before the wedding. They were happy with each other. At this time, an American prisoner of war was watched ashore in front of his house. The soldier was wounded and had evidently escaped from prison. As the area had villages full of fishermen, Sadao said that probably it was a fisherman who had been washed off his boat. He ran to help him. Hannah followed him. The loose sleeves of her hawari. Hawari means a loose outer garment worn over the kimono. Kimono means a traditional Japanese garment that flew as she ran. This part of the coast was not inhabited as it had dangerous rocks on it. As the rocks were pointed, the man could be badly injured, although he had managed to come through them. As the Japanese couple saw the man, they realized that he was badly injured. The sand on which he lay had blood stains on one side, which indicated that he was wounded. Yes, the injured man was an American. As his cap fell off, they saw his wet yellow-colored hair, which hadn't been cut for a long time. He was young. His face had such marks which indicated that he had been tortured. He had a rough unkempt, yellow-colored beard. As he had fainted, he did know of the presence of Sadao and Hannah. As he was a doctor, he moved his trained fingers around the man's back to search for the wound. He felt blood oozing out of a wound in the lower part of his back. It was a gunshot. The man had been injured a few days ago. He hadn't got any medical help to treat the wound, as he had himself used some black colored powdery substance on it. The sharp rocks on the shore had pierced it, and so it was bleeding. The American sailor was bleeding. They thought of throwing him back into the sea because he is an American. Okay, but they couldn't do so. Dr. Sadao carried him home. Hannah washes the soldier as Yami, the servant, refused to do so. Hannah was concerned that the man was injured and said in a low voice that he was bleeding. The mist had intensified now. The three of them couldn't be spotted by anyone. Moreover, the fishermen and the rat pickers didn't visit the place at that time of the day. So now they have understood that it's an American. So Sadao answered to himself and said that the best thing was to put the man back into the sea. As the bleeding stopped, he stood up and removed the dust from his hands. Hannah supported his opinion but looked intently at the man as he lay still. Sadao said that if they give him shelter, they would be arrested for sheltering an enemy. If they handed him over to the Japanese army as a prisoner, then he would die in the prison. As he thought that both the options were not favorable, so the best option was to put him back into the sea. Hannah added that the kindest act for them was to put him back into the sea. Both of them didn't move ahead to do so. Rather, they started the motionless figure with dislike. They disliked him because he was an enemy, an American. Sadao understood that the man was a sailor from an American warship and read out the words U.S. Navy written on the cap. They concluded that the man had been taken into captivity during the war. So they are so sure that it is not safe to take him home. Sadao and Hannah discussed that the man had tried to escape from the prison and had been shot in the back. They were not able to gather the courage to throw him into the sea. Hannah called upon Sadao for the firmness. She asked him if he was ready to put him into the sea. Sadao told her that he was able to do so and asked whether Hannah had the courage for it. Hannah replied in the negative and added that if he couldn't do it by himself, then she had to help him. Sadao was reluctant in throwing the man into the sea. He said that if the man was well, he would hand him over to the police without any hesitation. He added that he was not concerned about the man and considered him to be an enemy as he was an American. He commented that the injured man was a common man as his face looked as if he was a foolish person. He wanted to say that he was not bothered about the injured man, but his only concern was that he was wounded. Then they decided to carry him home. Sadao was concerned that the servants would object, as they would shelter an enemy. Hannah said that they would tell them that they intended to hand him over to the police once he recovered. She told him that they must do that. She added that they must consider their children's future and Sadao's position. If they did not hand over a prisoner of war to the police, they would be in danger. Sadao replied that certainly he would do so and he did not think of doing anything else. Sadao and Hannah lifted the injured man into the house. He was very light. The writer compares his weight to that of a hen and hasn't been fed for a long time, and his body loses flesh and reduces into mere feathers and skeleton. The man's arms were hanging, and they carried him up the steps into the side door of the house. The door opened into a passage, and they went down the passage towards an empty bedroom. The bedroom belonged to Sadao's father and hadn't been used after his death. The injured man was laid on the thick mat on the floor. The writer describes the room. Everything in the room was Japanese, as Sadao's father disliked foreign things. Hannah went to the cupboard in the wall and took a soft quilt. She resisted putting it on the injured man. The quilt was made of silk and had flowery print on it, and the lining was made of pure white silk. She was sad and spoke slowly that the man was very dirty. Sadao said that the man had to be washed. Sadao asked Hannah to get hot water so that he could wash the man. Hannah didn't want that Sadao should touch the man. She said that they would ask the servant to wash the injured man. She would call Yummy to leave attending the children for a few minutes and wash him. Sadao thought for a moment and then agreed with Hannah. He asked her to call Yummy while he would call the other servants. Before he could go out, he saw the injured man's face. It was so pale that he stopped, bent forward, and felt his heartbeat to see if he was alive. The heartbeat was very faint, but it was there. Then Sadao placed his hand on the man's heart to feel it. It was also beating. Sadao concluded thus that the injured man was alive. Sadao commented that if the man was not operated upon, he would die. He added that even if he was operated upon and saved, he would die at the hands of the Japanese army. So either ways, he would die. Hannah protested to operate him and save him, but the doctor part in Sadao became active and he decided to operate. He didn't wait for Hannah's reply. Hannah turned to the children's room and called out to Yummy. As the children heard her voice, she went inside, smiled at them, and played with 3-month-old son. As she held the baby, who had soft black hair, she motioned with her mouth to Yummy, asking her to come. Yummy replied that the baby was ready for sleep and that she must put it to sleep before accompanying her. Hannah held the baby and went to the bedroom next to the nursery with Yummy. Yummy spread the sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. Hannah led the way as they walked fast towards the kitchen. The 2 servants in the kitchen were scared after hearing their master's words regarding the injured man. The old gardener, who also worked as a servant, was pondering, means thinking over the news and pulling the hair from his upper lip. He said that Sadao must not treat the injured white man. He reasoned that the man was destined to die. Firstly, he had been wounded by a gunshot, and secondly, the rocks of the sea wounded him further. If Sadao healed the wounds given by the gun and the sea, then the gun and the sea would treat them as enemies and seek revenge. The gun represents the Japanese army and the sea represents the country of Japan. If they treated the enemy, they would be punished by Japan. Hannah politely said to the gardener that she would pass his message to the Sadao. She was frightened, though not superstitious like the old man. She thought that helping an enemy could never be good for them. Still, she asked Yummy to get hot water into the room where the injured man was kept. Hannah went inside first and moved the partition to one side. Sadao was not there. Yummy followed her and kept the wooden bucket on the floor. As she saw the white man, her thick lips folded and the expressions on her face indicated her determination. She said firmly that she had never washed an American man and that she would never wash one who was as dirty as that injured man. Hannah took a small clean towel, dipped it in the steaming hot water, and washed his face. The man's skin was rough due to being exposed to the sun, but it had a good texture and must have been very fair as a child. Hannah saw that Sadao was carrying his surgeon's emergency bag and was wearing his surgeon's coat. He was prepared to operate upon the injured man. He turned over the wounded soldier who lay unconscious. He washed his back and asked Hannah to help him. He wanted her to give the patient the anesthetic. Hannah had never seen an operation and she felt like vomiting. Sadao saw the blood in the wound. Hannah observed that there were red scars on the soldier's neck and realized that he had been tortured. Sadao removed the blood from the wound and declared that the American would survive. Sadao and Hannah looked after the American, but the servants were restless and irritated. The gardener felt the prisoner should have been allowed to bleed to death. On the seventh day, the servants left Sadao's house. They did not work that morning. Hannah paid them their wages. They cried as they left. Hannah didn't. The gardener was there since he was a boy. Yumi was attached to children. Hannah had to do all the household work on her own. Hannah wanted Sadao to get rid of the American quickly. Sadao promised to do something about it. In the evening, a messenger in uniform arrived. Hannah paralyzed with fright. She felt the servants must have complained and the messenger had come to arrest Sadao. The fears were washed away when they came to know that the old general had been suffering from an ailment. Sadao had been treating him and the general was in pain and had sent for him. Dr. Sadao, while treating the general, told him about the American in his house. The general promised to send his personal assassins, assassins means the professional killers, to quietly kill the American. Dr. Sadao didn't tell his wife about this plan and kept on waiting for the assassins for 3 nights, but they didn't turn up. By this time, the American recovered slowly. Dr. Sadao decided to send him to an unguarded island in the sea. He gave him a boat, a torch, loads of food and water, and a flashlight. He instructed him to stay on that island and wait for a Korean boat. He also told him to signal him 2 flashes if ran out of food before he took a boat. Dr. Sadao was again called by General and this time he had to be operated. Dr. Sadao told the General that the American had escaped. The General kept quiet about all this. Finally, Dr. Sadao didn't see any flash of light and realized that the prisoner had escaped safely. Here ends the explanation of the chapter. Now let's see the character sketch of the important characters in this chapter. First, let's see Dr. Sadao Hoki. Dr. Sadao is a Japanese surgeon and scientist. He was brought up by his father, who was a staunch Japanese devoted to his culture. Dr. Sadao became a skillful doctor and scientist to fulfill his father's wishes. His father sent him to America to study medicine. He wanted him to study for the benefit of his country. Dr. Sadao didn't even marry Hannah without his father's approval. He was so skilled that the general was totally dependent on him. The general has blind faith in him, which exemplifies him as a skillful and expert surgeon. Dr. Sadao was a loving husband and a good father. He consults and respects his wife. He is worried about the future of his kids in case he is arrested. He is meticulous and finally finds out a middle path. He feels happy to save the life of an American and to secure his and his family's future too. Next is Hannah. Hannah is an ideal wife, mother, and a true Japanese. She is patriotic and humanitarian with a compassionate heart. She supports her husband in his each and every decision. Though she does not like the idea of saving the enemy, that is the American prisoner of war, she cannot neglect that before being an enemy, he was a human being first. She is a dignified lady who carries herself in a very controlled way without sacrificing her dignity when the servants refuse to continue their services and defy her orders. Like any caring mother, she is worried about the future of her children in case Dr. Sadao is arrested for keeping the American in his house. Despite being worried, tense, and scared, she never loses her cool amid critical situations. Now let's see the exam halls. Here are two important questions. The first one is, how does the writer indicate that Dr. Sadao's father was a very conventional and traditional man? Second one is, Dr. Sadao was a patriotic Japanese as well as dedicated surgeon. How could he honor both the values? Write the answers in the comment box. Okay, my dear students, now we have gone through this chapter, the enemy that's written by Paulus Bach. Now we have discussed the important questions, the character sketch, theme, everything we have discussed in this video. I hope you have liked this video. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon to get more notifications. See you soon in the next video. Bye.